But I think being aware of being lost, being aware that you don't know, being aware that you don't have the direction, I think it's a great possibility, because now you can actually go and seek it out and then find the right thing that may bring fulfillment to you. If everyone's focusing on Silicon Valley, focusing on San Francisco and New York and Austin and London and Berlin and Amsterdam, it's a very small percentage of the world's population. Well, what if you could flow capital into places like Myanmar? The world just becomes a better place.
Hello and welcome to the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast, where we interview business leaders and emerging market experts on business innovations, market opportunities, and macro-level trends in emerging and frontier market countries. Join us for the next hour to dive deep into the world of emerging markets as we speak with top performers who are successfully investing, working, and living in these markets themselves. Today we are joined by Vikram Bharati. Vikram is the founder of the Draper Startup House for entrepreneurs and also the Draper Startup House Ventures and countless other startups, venture funds, and venture builders. He's a huge figure here in the Singapore startup scene. I've had the chance to visit his beautiful startup house in Ong Siang Hill, and it's definitely not his only startup house. Most of the other ones are located in emerging market countries that we like to cover here on the INSEAD Emerging Markets podcast, such as Georgia, the country Georgia, Indonesia, Thailand, Myanmar, and India. And he's doing a lot of interesting work supporting entrepreneurs in all of these locations. So these startup spaces are not just your typical co-living or co-working space. There's a lot more going on, which I'm sure we will cover later on in the podcast. But I think a good place to start would be a story that I learned while doing some research on you, Vikram. I read that you took a round the world trip post MBA, and that experience led you to what you're doing now. So I think that's as good of a place as any to start, especially since this is an MBA related podcast. It's the INSEAD Emerging Markets podcast after all, and many of the listeners may be MBAs or alumni themselves. And so while your path may not be the typical post MBA path, I think it's one that most would probably want to replicate if they could. And so I would love to just learn a bit more about why you decided to take that trip and what you got out of it that led you to doing what you are doing now.
Yeah, definitely. So starting Draper Startup House was sort of a culmination of a bit of a soul-searching trip that I did post-business school. I, at the time, was a professional working in banking. And I was living in Los Angeles, working at JP Morgan, had a great career and great life and great friends. And it was almost sort of like too good to be true in terms of the privilege that I was in. But there was sort of a very nagging voice deep inside that really wanted me to get out of my comfort zone and really explore the world a lot more than just taking vacations and seeing things on the screen. So I decided to do a bit of an adventure travel and went down to South America, was doing a lot of hitchhiking and couch surfing and staying in backpacker hostels. And it's what was supposed to be sort of 6 months of this adventure travel ended up being 2 years of me really just roaming around the world and having the time of my life, and really discovering a lot of new cities, new countries that I would have never gone to, making friends all over the world, and just being on my own. And I think that was sort of like the secret was traveling on your own, confronting the unknowns, the unpredictabilities, the chance encounters all over the world. And that's sort of what led me to Singapore, where I've been living now for almost 5 years. I met my wife now. We have 2 kids. I met her while I was traveling. And yeah, we're settled here. And when I moved to Singapore, I certainly was a much different person than when I had started my trip years before. And I wanted to really get involved in things that were interesting to me. So I was very interested in venture capital. I was very interested in startups. I was very interested in cross-border businesses. I was very interested in new emerging markets. And I was very much interested in adventure and exploring, doing business in countries that usually are not sort of on the radar. And so I decided to start a new hospitality concept which was essentially taking the backpacker hostels and converting them into almost sort of like innovation houses, where there would be a complete sort of business ecosystem that would be layered on top of the spaces. And what started off as an experiment grew from being an experiment to a little bit more than an experiment. And that was 3 years ago. And now we have 15 spaces all around the world, including South America, the US, Europe, and Asia. And yeah, we're taking the punches of COVID and trying to figure out how to navigate the business, find new opportunities, and continue to stay optimistic and grow, as well as really trying to pin down our identity as a business, who we really are, because that's always in the flux in an early stage company like us. But we're going with the flow and having a good time doing it.
Amazing. I love it. So that gives me many questions, from how you met your wife to what you're doing to define your business identity. But the one that I'd like to explore first is if there was one aspect of that trip that was most helpful for you. I actually took a somewhat similar trip myself several years ago that inspired a career change and was quite transformational for me. And I've since thought that if I do have a child, I would like to encourage them to do the same before college, or maybe even instead of college. So definitely a strong believer in how travel can lead to career and personal development. And so that's why it would be very interesting to me to learn if there was one aspect of traveling that was most helpful for you, whether it was the backpacker culture of meeting people from all over the world, or having time to see how life is lived differently in different places, or whether it was more of an internal journey of just learning about yourself while you were outside of your standard environment, or something else. So curious in general if there was one aspect of this trip that allowed you to come to this mission and find your purpose, or whether it was a variety of factors that all came together and helped you decide that this is what I want to do with my life.
Yeah, no, it was certainly, travel was a huge component of my journey, and just the mechanics of going to new places, meeting new people, seeing new things, having new experiences. So that that was a huge component of the world opening up to you, or you opening up to the world, and realizing that there is definitely a lot more out in the world than usually the bubble that we live in our day-to-day mechanics of our life, no matter where we live. And so it's always nice to be outside of your environment. So there is certainly that component. But I think just on a personal note, I was sort of searching for the next thing in my life. And I was sort of lost on a personal level. Internally, I was sort of lost in terms of, I don't think I had the right direction of where I wanted to take my life. Because you're in business school, you realize that most students graduate from business school, which was my case. I went to USC, Marshall School of Business, did my MBA. And generally, I find that a huge group, not everyone, but big majority of recent MBA grads generally go into a direction that everyone else is going into, which is not a bad thing. But I find that a lot of times, if you actually really talk to a lot of these students, they go in that general direction because everyone else is going in that direction. And it's not a bad direction to go into, but generally a lot of the folks don't have their own sense of direction that they want to achieve on their own. So it becomes sort of like a consensus direction, like, hey, you go into these industries because they pay well, and there's prestige, and then there's a good lifestyle, and these are all great things. We're very privileged to have those options. But internally, I was lost in the sense that even though I was in that direction, it was not really the direction that I wanted to go into. And the truth was, I didn't really know what direction to go into. And that was the idea of being lost, was I didn't know what direction to go into. And so me putting myself out in the universe, throwing myself out into random places to search for that direction that I wanted to go into was a great adventure. Because I'd go to, say, Berlin, and I'd meet all these great people doing different things that would give me ideas. Or I'd go to Peru and meet all these people doing different things, and that'd give me some inspiration and ideas. So I think the mechanics of traveling and seeing new things as a search function, you're searching for inspiration, searching for things that inspire you, and searching for things that may interest you to find a direction. I think the combination of those two things, that personal search as well as the mechanics of physically being in new places, was extremely fulfilling and helpful. And now I think I have a much clearer sense of direction and understanding of what I want to achieve in life and the things I want to do. And so that travel bug, that itch has been scratched, and I kind of feel that I don't necessarily have to ever do any more solo backpacking anymore because I've done it. I kind of feel like I've sort of seen a little bit of the world. And so I feel like now I can focus on the directions or the direction that I have found to take my life into. And so that's nice. It's nice to have that sense of like, okay, I kind of know where I want to go, and I've seen the things that I might have been very curious to try and do, but I don't need to do them anymore because I've done it.
Yeah, that is a great answer. I think it's a very important point. As you know, I'm finishing up the MBA right now, and I and my classmates, we are all around the age of 30, but I think a lot of us, we're still figuring out what we want in life. And a lot of the careers we're looking into are partly just ones we're looking at because they do increase optionality, because we're still not 100% sure over the long term what impact we want to make on the world. So an option like consulting, for example, that gives you a few years and exposes you to different things and has different exit options becomes attractive for that reason. So it would be interesting to know if you have specific examples of how stepping out of your comfort zone in the way that you did and taking that personal journey around the world would be helpful for someone, because I think that there are a lot of people who are in this stage in their life, whether they're MBAs or other people who know that they're not doing what they want to do, they're not where they want to be in life, but then they have the fear of taking the plunge and doing that thing that is more meaningful for them. And beyond that, I think that there are a lot of people who, probably even more people who may not even know what they want to do. They just know that I want to do something more meaningful, but I don't even know what it is at this stage. So if you could talk a little bit more about how traveling helped you reach that stage where you knew this is what my mission is, this is what my purpose is, this is what I want to do with my life. And if you have personal examples of how it led to you reaching that stage, that would be extremely helpful for the audience. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the important things that when I look back at my journey, I think one of the things that helped me was just embracing being lost and realizing that there's a lot of power in being lost and not knowing. I think a lot of times I used to be lost and not have a direction, and I would panic. And when you're surrounded by very competitive MBA type folks and everyone seems to have their life figured out and you don't, you become sort of a product of your environment in the sense that there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of eyes that are looking at what everyone else is doing. But I think there's really a lot of power in being lost. And there's a lot of embracing the unknown and embracing that you don't have the right direction is actually a very good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And once you realize that not knowing what you want to do it's a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous potential because you can kind of start from scratch. And I think if you're not happy with the direction that you're going into, but you sort of just go in that direction without the awareness that this is not the right direction you want to go into, there's no way back, right? You sort of like go down that route and you continue to go down that route. But I think being aware from the very beginning of being lost, being aware that you don't know, that being aware that you don't have the direction, I think it's a great possibility because now you can actually go and seek it out and then find the right thing that may bring fulfillment to you. So that's the first thing, just embracing being lost and finding a lot of potential in being lost. And I think the second thing is really trying out a lot of things. And so when I was traveling, I tried a lot of things. I tried building a lot of different things. I tried working a lot of different projects, volunteered in a lot of different things. And so essentially got my hands dirty in lots and lots of different projects and in lots of different countries with lots of different types of people. And I think that just trying lots of different things gave me a sense of what I like to do, what I don't like to do. And so when I started my thing, it was a culmination of me having tried lots of different things. And I kind of knew what would work and what would not work for me, because a lot of the things that I tried, some of them really, really failed. Some of them were successful. And so just trying lots of different things, I guess, and especially if people in their early 30s or, just graduating business school, there's plenty of time. It's just it's a really good time to travel and see the world and experiment.
Definitely. I guess now I will get more into questions about the business itself. I'd love it if you could tell me a bit more about what you're up to at the Draper Startup House, what your mid to long-term goals are, and what your ultimate goal is for this business, as well as any other projects that you may be up to right now, because I know that you did mention that you're doing quite well during COVID and you're expanding a lot. So I would guess that that's not limited to the physical business. So would love to learn more about what it is that you're up to these days.
Yeah. So ultimately, our mission with the company, what we really want to achieve in the next 10 years is we want to help build 1 million businesses around the world. And that's our company's mission and goal. We have very long ways to go, but we believe as a company, and I believe as a person, that the most powerful thing that we as humans in the world have is the idea of creating and the idea of entrepreneurship and building a business. And I think this idea of building businesses, creating opportunity, innovating, finding solutions to problems, this is a very, very powerful tool. In fact, we think this is the most powerful tool that we in the world, we as humans have, because the idea of entrepreneurship and the idea of solving problems and creating new things is something that can solve most of the problems that we have in the world, whether it's environmental, whether it's economic disparity, whatever the problems that come around in the world, whether it's pandemics. The idea of entrepreneurship is the most powerful tool to sort of essentially solve a lot of these problems. And so that's the thesis that we have. And we want to build a global business ecosystem, which will then result in us helping to build 1 million businesses around the world. And it's sort of a lofty goal and an ambitious goal, but I think it's very doable because the world is very big and there's billions of people. And so 1 million businesses, it's a scratching the surface, really. So that's the goal. And the way we want to achieve that is we want to build a brand that has essentially, we do 4 things in the company. One is hospitality services. So we think that as people travel, they need a place to stay, they need a place to work. So we want to create these physical hubs around the world. So we call it hospitality services, and it consists of hotels, hostels, co-living spaces, shared spaces, lots of different physical types of spaces. And the second thing we do is education. And so we have a sister company called Draper University, which does a lot of acceleration and incubation, both online and physically, and lots of different education programs around the idea of how to build a business and education around simple things like how to raise money, how to find co-founders, etc. So that's the education piece. And then the third thing we do is we help people raise money. And so the investment services is we currently have a global syndicate where we have hundreds of investors from all around the world, thousands of companies from all around the world on this platform, and everyone's being match made and raising capital across border. It's a global syndicate. And the fourth thing we do is business services. So we have an arm that does technology outsourcing. And so if you are a company that's looking to build an app or a website or a CRM system, we can do that. Also, the other service we do is market entry. So we help companies enter new markets. And so right now we're working on a project where we're helping clean tech businesses from Finland to enter into the Malaysia market. And so that's a service that we provide. And we want to continue building different products within that service suite. Within the investments side, we're about to launch our own fund where we have commitments from investors where we will have direct investments that we'll put into companies that come into our ecosystem. So the combination of all of this is a complete business ecosystem and hope to continue to grow this. Our goal is to have physical spaces and our brand in 100 countries over the next 10 years. We're currently in 12 countries, so we have a long ways to go. But we want to build a thriving hospitality service that has a complete innovation, entrepreneurship, startup ecosystem on top of it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really a very amazing concept. And beyond that, the execution of it is very well done. I've only been to your space here in Singapore, but not only was it a physically attractive space in a good location in the city, what stood out to me most was that the sense of community that you've engendered there is quite a bit different from other co-working or even co-living spaces I've been to. You could really tell something special was going on with a lot of the top, very exciting startups had people there, whether or not the startup itself was based out of your space. I met some really cool people there who are doing some very exciting things here in Singapore. And beyond that, they were actually interacting and eating with each other and doing things much more socially than I see in these type of spaces typically. So definitely got a very interesting thing going there. I guess my second question about Draper would be why you've chosen to operate out of the countries that you are operating in, because looking at your website, I'd say the majority, or even if not the majority, a lot of the countries that you do have your startup houses in are emerging market countries. And so I was curious if that was a business decision or personal decision, or what made you want to have the Draper Startup House be located in so many emerging and frontier market countries.
Yeah. So, I've always sort of struggled with the term emerging markets because I don't really know what that means. And I know there's lots of different definitions of what an emerging market is. There's like an economic definition, there's a banking definition. So I always struggle with that means. But I suppose if emerging markets is sort of the textbook definition, a developing country actually recently emerged, I suppose, then I you could say that 90% of the world is emerging markets, that, or at least 90% of the world's population lives in emerging markets. So I think emerging markets is the status quo, and emerged markets or developed markets are the outliers. And so most of the world is emerging in that sense. So it makes a lot of sense to sort of focus on where the critical mass is in terms of creating opportunities for people. I suppose if I had to give an example of an emerging market that we were in but are not in anymore, it is Myanmar, which is an extremely, probably in the other end spectrum of emerging markets, completely closed off to the world for the last 50 years and sort of opened up 5-6 years ago and have now gone back into being a sanctioned country and a closed country because of the military coup. And so it's a country of 60 million people. And there's a lot of young people who are educated and looking for opportunities to connect with the world. Everyone has the internet and smartphones, and they're seeking to grow out of their past. And so there was a lot of optimism and excitement about this country coming out of 50 years of isolation to now open up to the world, which just means 60 million more brains plugged into the internet. And who knows what kind of ideas would come out of that country. So that's an extreme example of an extremely emerging country. But, I got to say, it's really fascinating to be in countries like that, because you realize that most of the world is like that, and that you and I, who have the privilege to go to great business schools, have passports from countries where we can just jump on a plane and go somewhere. That's a very, very small percentage of the world's population. And most of the world are people like, our community in Yangon, that are young, hungry kids who want to see the world, who want to build things, who want to have the opportunities to, like we had. And I think if we can provide and build that infrastructure to connect the world like them into a business ecosystem, it gave us a point of pride when we were helping startups from Myanmar raise capital from VCs in Silicon Valley. And that is, I think, we can actually do that around the world, where flow of capital can go wherever there's talent, where there's good opportunity and good business ideas. I think the world just becomes a better place. And I just feel that if everyone's focusing on Silicon Valley, focusing on San Francisco and New York and Austin and London and Berlin and Amsterdam, it's a very small percentage of the world's population. But what if you could flow capital into places like Myanmar? I think it makes the world a better place. So I guess part of the reason why we're in emerging markets is because of that sort of thesis, more from a macro perspective. But also, I think it's just fun to be in emerging markets. I like adventure and I like being in places that are not so developed. I live in Singapore, which is an extremely developed country. I'm from Los Angeles, which is a part of a developed country. And so it's nice to be in places that are different, where there is a lot of work to be done.
That makes a lot of sense. So a quick follow-up on that. Are there any countries that you enjoy spending time in the most, either for personal or for business reasons?
Yeah, well, I certainly like Indonesia a lot. We have a space in Bali, which is sort of a digital nomad hub in the world. A lot of digital nomads from around the world come to Bali because it has, the rice paddies and coconuts, and it's a beautiful place. So I certainly like going there. But the country that I actually find very fascinating that I go to, I haven't gone to in a while because of the pandemic, but where I would like to go next is Estonia. And Estonia certainly is, I don't think it's part of emerging markets because they're part of the European Union and it's a developed country. But the reason why I find it fascinating is, first of all, not many people know where Estonia is because it's such a small country. It's a tiny, tiny pin, on the map. It has 1 million people as a population, so it's tiny. It was post-Soviet, so it was part of the Soviet Union. It became independent in 1990, which is 30 years ago, which is really not that long ago, right? If you think about it. And now in the entire world, they're one of the most digitally savvy country. Everyone votes with their phone. So the voting system is completely digital. They have this thing called the e-residency program, which basically opens up their government infrastructure to anyone in the world that's not from Estonia, which is fascinating because then companies can set up there remotely, set up a EU company, pay taxes in Estonia. So they're doing amazing, amazing things. They have the most startup unicorns per capita in the world. For a country of 1 million people, I think they have 6 or 7 unicorns. Skype came from there. TransferWise came from there. And so they have a lot of success, which is fascinating. But what I find most fascinating is how they were able to so quickly, since becoming independent in 1990, been able to achieve this so quickly. And I think that's fascinating. And it has, I find a lot of similarities between Estonia and Singapore, because Singapore is also, from a geography perspective, small place, small population, not a lot of natural resources, but they've had a great success for a new country, and they've been able to achieve and become a global player in a short amount of time. And Estonia has done that as well. So when you look at these small countries with such checkered pasts and pasts that have been not so favorable for these countries, to then essentially emerge so quickly and become these great success stories, so you have to ask, why is this? Why is this the case? And if they can do it, why can't other countries do it? And so I find Estonia to be extremely fascinating. That's why we have a space there. And I hope to be more involved with things over there.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool place. I actually had to write a report about startup ecosystems for one of my internships, and it was basically focused on Estonia, Singapore, Israel, and Portugal. But when looking at some of these less developed countries around the world, do you see any that you could predict becoming the next Estonia based on policies that they're trying to put in place now? Or are there any up and coming countries that you think might be able to achieve this success based on what you're seeing in those places?
Yeah. So there are countries in Europe that I think are going to be very interesting. Countries that are Eastern European bloc. I think countries like Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state Georgia. There's a lot of interesting things happening in Tbilisi. We're actually about to launch a developers co-living house in Tbilisi, where we're bringing junior developers. They live in a house, and we help them get to the next phase of their development journey. I think so. Countries like that, small countries, they're doing some very interesting things. I think Lithuania, Latvia, there's a lot of technical talent in those countries. I think there's going to be some great things that come out of there. And, they're just full of hungry, talented people who really just want to participate in the global economy. And they've been, because of the political situations and the leadership, it's been hampered down. But I think Eastern European countries that are not part of the EU, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. I think in Asia, Korea is interesting, though Korea is a very developed country. I think Vietnam is very interesting. I think very emerging country, but I think Bangladesh is actually a very interesting country. I think there's a lot of manufacturing going into Bangladesh. There's a lot of technical talent coming out of Bangladesh. There's now capital slowly flowing into Bangladesh. So I think that's an interesting country to watch. I think Pakistan is a very interesting country to watch. Our main investor is Tim Draper, and he's now starting to make investments in Pakistan. There's a lot of technical talent. I think Sri Lanka is actually a very interesting place, just because there's a lot of technical talent being developed in these countries, and they're all very hungry to succeed. So yeah, those countries. I think Latin America, it's a place to watch, especially there's been some successes in Brazil, and I think Colombia is interesting. So yeah, lots of lots of countries. I mean, I think in Africa, I think clearly there's Nigeria that's showing a lot of promise, and there's a lot of activity going on there. I think a lot of the big companies like Facebook, Google, they're setting up shop there, trying to foster the technical development there. A lot of cool stuff with crypto happening. So Nigeria is really cool. I think Nairobi is interesting. So yeah, lots of interesting countries to watch for.
For sure, it's really pretty exciting, especially in the past. Even still, some people maybe today have a way of looking at the developing world as hopeless and in need of aid. But now you're seeing a lot of these countries working to attract talent and capital in really innovative ways and growing really quickly. I mean, it is where a lot of the growth in the world is these days, is in the emerging and frontier markets. And it's really exciting to see how that narrative is changing. I recently did an interview with a few guys from Bangladesh, and there's just super exciting growth happening in that country. I think 10 years ago, no one would be talking about Bangladesh the way they are now. So really, yeah, this is the exciting part about working in and learning about emerging markets. So switching gears a little bit, I would be curious to know a bit more about your fundraising process and how it may have differed being located here in Asia versus the US or the Western world, and also just how it is to raise capital in emerging markets in general. I know you mentioned that you're helping some of your startups in these spaces raise capital. And more particularly, I'd be interested in how your relationship with Tim Draper began and how he got involved with the Draper Startup House that you're running, and how that relationship has been for you.
Yeah. So in terms of flow of capital, I think the last year and a half during this pandemic has changed quite a few things. I think capital is now flowing a lot more cross-border and now I'm talking about venture capital and not your traditional private equity type of capital. It's like sort of venture capital. I think it's starting to flow a lot more global, because in the last year and a half, a lot of the venture investors have been doing investments remotely, so I think it's opened up the floodgates where if you can sit behind a laptop and make investments anywhere in the world, or make investments within the US, then why not the next country over, right? Because capital it's all digital anyways. So I think that's really changed the dynamics a little bit, where now money's starting to flow globally from generally where a lot of the investment generally comes from. And so that's an interesting dynamic. And secondly, I think just because of transparency of technology has allowed people to connect, the talents to emerge. So if you're a talented person with a company in Pakistan, I think you can catch the eyes of people anywhere in the world through Twitter or through just YouTube or whatnot. So I think that the borders have come down a lot more over the last couple of years. I think investors have become more comfortable with taking more risk globally. And so I think this is a very exciting time. If you have a business that needs capital and it's a good business, or you found a market or a business model that's unique, it's a lot easier to raise capital now than it was, I would say, even 3-4 years ago. And I think I'm a good case in point of that. I'm a good example of that, because I started this company 3 years ago, and my first investor was from Singapore, because I actually worked at a small venture capital fund, and they put in the first check. But then since then, the investors I've gotten on board are from Philippines and Estonia and Silicon Valley. So the investors have come from all over the world. And what we're doing is not really venture back. I mean, it's not generally a venture capital type of business. This is that 100x growth and 100x scale that venture money looks for. But I think we're experimenting with something new, trying a new business model. So I think that's probably why people have taken a little bit of interest in us. But if I can sit in Singapore and raise money from well-known investors, then I think sort of anyone can really do it. And the way we got introduced to Tim was sort of, I guess, serendipity and right time, right place, doing the right thing. And so his team actually approached us because what we were doing was interesting to them, to sort of take that Draper ecosystem and proliferate it around the world. So we could potentially have been a good vehicle to do that distribution. And so that's probably the main reason. But I think people like Tim are investing all over the world, and they're investing in interesting, unique ideas. So I think anyone can do it.
Sure, totally. And related to the first point that you brought up about how the COVID has actually made it easier to raise funds outside of the US. Clearly, with a physical location-based business, COVID has probably made some things more difficult. But I was curious if there are any other positives you see from the situation that's been created by the pandemic.
Yeah, I think from a business perspective, pandemic has been a great catalyzer and what a great accelerator of being able to be productive, to be more productive, and find ways to grow your business digitally versus physically. So in the last year and a half, we've expanded to 5 new countries, and it was all done digitally. And there's a physical spaces that we are launching and hiring people and doing the designs. It's all being done digitally. So it's shown us that we can grow without having to jump on a plane and go to new cities, new countries, which is really, really fantastic for us, because it just means we save a lot on travel. We save a lot of money on time wasted, sleeping in an airplane. And we can do a lot of things just very quickly. It means I get to spend more time with my family. So I think for most businesses, the idea that you can now do it remotely, digitally, is in aggregate a really, really positive thing. And it's been a great thing for us, because even though our physical spaces business, physical travel, took a really nosedive and sort of came down to zero, we were able to focus on things like building our ventures platform, building our services business, building the education piece, which is all sort of mostly digital. And so we were able to focus on new things. Not to say that it's not been extremely difficult, but I'd like to sort of take a look at the positive side of it. And so it's been good for us to be able to be aware that we can do this remotely, digitally, which we would have probably never thought of doing it this way if we were sort of forced to do it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Podcast. To stay up to date on events we may be hosting, emerging market news, and to build your personal network, please feel free to join the INSEAD Alumni Emerging Markets Interest Group on LinkedIn.